Okay. Hi, everyone. How are you? If you don't know who I am, my name's Kevin Williams, and I'm part of the leadership team at Jericho Road. And, following up with Ryan, I'm really happy that you're here because it shows that you have interest in addiction and solutions, right? Because we always say that this is a community problem and it requires a community solution. And we have to start taking the stigma away, like the naloxone kits. They should be everywhere. They should be everywhere. Every time you get a prescription for an opioid, there should be a naloxone kit with it, right? But there's a lot of stigma and a lot of old attitudes and old thinking that goes behind addiction and drugs in general. And so we got to start wrapping our heads around that this is a community issue which requires a community problem or community solution. So one of the things that I like to get started with, this. Oh, this is going to be fun, eh? Why isn't it working, John? Down? There we go. So, 38% of your congregation, 38% of a group setting is struggling with some form of addiction, substance or behavioral. So what's the difference between a substance and a behavioral addiction? It's really simple. With a substance addiction, you're ingesting something. That's it. And substance addictions, are very similar in their outlook and their onset and how people behave to behavioral addictions, but you're ingesting something. If you take the total combination of substance and behavioral addictions combined, that's the percentage in Canada. It's big. It's huge. This is not just a them problem anymore. This is an us problem. Sobering thoughts. Come on. There we go. So availability and access to affordable treatment is a major challenge for people in recovery. You see the TV commercials all the time. The one down in Brockville, I forget the name of it off the top of my head. There's private in Ottawa. There's private institutions all over the Ottawa Valley. Does anyone know what the average cost is for a private institution for a 30-day treatment program? Vicki? Yes, Long Island. Thousand Islands. Yes. $30,000 a month. Yeah.
But if you relapse within the first 60 days, they'll give you an extra 2 weeks.
Yes. Yeah. And a lot of these places are very business orientated, so they want you to come back, right? The other thing is the epidemic of addiction. That's my alarm. I turned my phone off. There we go. The epidemic of addiction can't be solved without a combination of all our communal efforts. That means, once again, it's community. We all need to be involved. It's not going away. You saw the stats from Ryan. It's not going away. It's getting worse. We need the right tools to approach addiction and recovery in our communities. We're not working together. Everyone's doing their things in their silos. Mental health and addiction go together. The problem that we have right now is with co-occurring disorders, mental health and addiction. And so the mental health people want to treat the mental health aspect, and the addiction people want to treat the addiction aspect. But when they go together, you end up not solving the problem. And so we end up spinning in circles. We're not expected to have all the answers. This is a very complex problem, and it requires a lot of us to be involved in the solution. So, What is a substance use disorder? The Canadian Medical Association defines addiction or substance use disorder as a type 1 disease. What's a type 1 disease? It's chronic. It's constantly reoccurring and difficult to eradicate. It's progressive. So it starts off not too bad, but it continually gets worse, it continually grows, and it continually escalates. And with substance use disorders and addiction, what we call is the progression of the disease. It always gets worse, it never gets better if you continue to use. Very few people maintain their addiction at a social and recreational use. Very few. It's incurable. What does that mean, incurable? What does it mean? It's never going away, right? So for those of us in recovery, we're always in recovery. If we are not in recovery, because this disease is incurable and chronic and progressive, it will come back. It will come back. And last but not least, a type 1 disease is fatal. In the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, in the rooms, 12-step rooms, we say it's jails, institution, and death. One of those three things is going to happen eventually. Guaranteed, if you keep using. Addiction is defined by any repeated behavior in which a person feels compelled to persist regardless of its negative impact on my life and the life of those around me. So anybody with a substance use disorder directly affects 5 people in their life. Directly affects. So if the 4 of you and I were in a family situation and I had a substance use issue, each one of you would be directly affected. Your mental health, your physical health, your financial health, your emotional health would all be affected because of my use. And so when you look at the previous slide, the statistic of behavioral and substance use disorders, if 15 to 20%, which is a very good average in Canada, is suffering from substance use disorder, what does that mean? It means that about another 40% are directly affected. Directly affected. Come on, there we go. Misconceptions and stigma. Prayer and abstinence is enough. It's a great place to start, but ongoing recovery work is always required. We're always in recovery. We're always, as we say, growing. Come on. Addiction can be solved by self-will. You know, I thought that my addiction could be solved by self-will. Why did I think that? Because on my path in the progression of my illness, my mother said to me, "Don't you have the willpower to stop?" And so what did I think? I thought willpower was going to get me out of this. And no matter how hard I tried, nothing worked. And so part of the misconception with substance use disorders, with addiction, is that this is a problem of self-will. It's a moral issue, and it's not. We need recovery. We need the 12 steps as a process to attain the solution, and the solution is God, is a higher power. Recovery is not a simple solution. It's an ongoing journey. Everybody's recovery looks different. There's no one set path to recovery. The solution is having a higher power, but how you get to there looks different for everybody. And of course, the big one, that addiction's a choice. Nobody wakes up and says, "I'm going to be a drug addict today." Nobody wakes up and says, I'm going to be an alcoholic. It's not a choice. So why do people do what they do? That's the big question. This is the disease model of alcoholism and drug addiction. If you take a look at that, if you can see it, right here's my emotional barometer. And most people, most normal people, they've had a rough day at work. The kids have been upsetting. They had a long week. My brother is a normie, and so I see it in him all the time. He's had a long week. He comes home Friday, and what does he do? Has a beer, right? He has a beer. He mows the lawn. Maybe he might have one more, and then he'll have dinner, watch a movie, do what he needs to do, and go to bed normal. My mom's a normie. She has a half a glass of wine at dinner and pushes the rest away. I can't figure that one out, right? And she said, I've had enough, you know? I remember one time she said, I'm feeling woozy and lightheaded. And I was like, yeah, you know, but for normies, that's enough, right? And so, you know, their body metabolizes alcohol different than we do. And so what happens is we metabolize alcohol different. And our body, what happens is it creates this craving for more alcohol because our bodies absorb alcohol differently. And with drugs, it's called, instead of a craving, it's called a compulsion. And it's a physical reaction to the drug, to the alcohol, that makes us want more. It's also our solution. After I drink for 3 days, I wake up after a spree and I'm filled with guilt, remorse, resentment, self-pity, fear. And what does my mind say? Hey? Have more, right? Why do I use it? To get rid of fear, guilt, shame, remorse, all that stuff. So I've trained my brain to say, this works, albeit very temporarily, it works. And so if you're constantly filled with fear, guilt, shame, resentment, all those yucky feelings, and you know that this substance is going to make those feelings go away, right? So it's a physical and a mental. The solution is spiritual. So in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, it says, Dr. Silkwood, who did this chart, says, in the statement he confirms that we have suffered alcoholic torture, must believe the body of the alcoholic is quite as abnormal as his mind. So it's a two-factor. Dr. Silkworth, who is a very big person who started working with the founders of Alcoholics Anonymous, he really understood alcoholism. He said, many doctors and psychiatrists agree with our conclusions. One of these men, staff members at a world-renowned hospital, recently made this statement to some of us. What you say about the general hopelessness of the average alcoholic's plight is, in my opinion, correct. Type 1 disease. There's no doubt in my mind that you're 100% hopeless apart from, here's the kicker, divine help. What does divine help mean? I need help from God to get out of this. Had you offered yourselves as patients at this hospital, I would have taken you if you'd been able to avoid it. People like you are too heartbreaking. So not a religious person, I have profound respect for the spiritual approach in such cases as yours. For most cases, there's virtually no other solution. There's no other solution. The 12-step program is a solution to our problem. The 12-step program is spiritual and altruistic. So I got to find God and help others. That's the solution. for every 12 step, whether it be Narcotics Anonymous, Cocaine Anonymous, Sex Anonymous, Overeaters Anonymous, Alcoholics Anonymous. Every 12-step program is built around the same foundation. It's a spiritual solution where we have to help others. Ryan had some great stats, and I mean, we know it's not going away. More Canadians are hospitalized every day for health problems and injuries caused by alcohol and drugs. Somebody was asking why it was so low in the eastern provinces. Every province has a different reporting system, and the coroners are responsible for it. So one province, if I'm drunk out of my mind and I climb up on the roof to fix my antenna, and I fall off the roof, fall down, and kill myself, the coroner reports that as an accidental death. It's not. I died because I was drunk, because of alcohol. So everybody reports it differently. But on the average, in Canada, more people are hospitalized from alcohol and drugs than heart attacks and strokes combined. 10 Canadians die in hospital every day by harm from substance abuse. 75% of those deaths are related to alcohol. Those statistics, to me, are staggering. Staggering. In Ottawa during 2019, there were 65 deaths linked to opioids. In 2020, that number is 89. 2021, it's over 121. It just keeps going up. We have to start addressing this as a community. So, why do people choose drugs and alcohol? This is the number one reason: trauma. The biggest trauma that most of us have experienced who are abusing drugs and alcohol are adverse childhood experiences. So these are traumatic experiences between the ages of 3 and 13. There's an adverse childhood experience test. I'm going to give you a whole bunch of information when we're done there so you can take it home. The adverse childhood experience test is a test that we give, and it basically evaluates how many traumatic events you've had in your life. So at Jericho Road, we give the test, and when people come in, I've never seen a score lower than 6. Oh yes, because that's the age where childhood traumatic experiences have the most detrimental effect on our well-being. So we'll get into what is a adverse childhood experience, but you have to understand with trauma, what may be traumatic for me may not be traumatic for you, and vice versa, right? So your parents divorcing when you were 5 years old, that may not affect you. You may go on to live a normal life, not with any emotional strings attached to your parents getting divorced at that age. Now, for someone else, that may have rocked their world. They may have issues of abandonment. They may have issues of isolation. They may have anxiety, fear of people leaving them, on and on and on. And so we have to remember that what is a traumatic for me may not be for you, and vice versa. The big thing is that preventing adverse childhood experiences could reduce the number of adults with depression by as much as 44%. And the big, the wraparound for all this is that, it says adverse childhood experiences are the single greatest unaddressed public health threat facing our nation today. The single biggest. So, what's an adverse childhood experience? Well, we give a test. Did a parent or other adult in your household often swear, insult you, put you down, humiliate you? Did a parent or other adult in the household often push, grab, slap, throw something at you, hit you so hard that it left marks, or were injured? Did an adult person at least 5 years older than you ever touch or fondle you, or have you touched their body in a sexual way? Has any any of your parents been to prison? Has anyone in your family been incarcerated for longer than 3 years? These are all major adverse childhood experiences that are going to affect you. 16% of youth aged 14 to 17 were sexually assaulted or sexually abused. Now, they say in Canada, substance use disorder and alcoholism is roughly 15%. Those two numbers are too closely associated not to be a coincidence. If I have 4 or more ACEs, I'm twice as likely to have the level of liver disease than the normal person. Why? Because I'm drinking all the time to escape my trauma. I'm 3 times more likely to have lung disease and adult smoking. Why? If I had adverse childhood trauma, I'm 40% more likely to begin smoking at a young age. 11 times the level of IV drug use, 14 times the number of suicide attempts. 67% of the population have 1 or more ACEs. Think about that. 67% of our population has experienced trauma between the ages of 3 and 13. That number to me is staggering, but it explains a lot. And 1/8 of the population has 4 or more ACEs. So, what's the reality? Substantial numbers of individuals involved with mental health addictions in the criminal justice system have complex histories of trauma and intergenerational trauma. This is the big kicker, intergenerational trauma. I like to use a familiar term for all of us, breaking the chains, right? This is breaking the chains. We gotta get this under control. And so intergenerational trauma is huge. If I grew up in a household where my father hit my mother, what are the chances that I'm going to hit my partner? What do you think the percentage rate is? Higher. 80. That's intergenerational trauma. %90 of females and 62% of males accessing mental health concurrent services reported trauma. Concurrent services, mental health and addiction. Some populations have disproportionately higher numbers. Marginalized people, such as individuals experience homelessness, indigenous communities, BIPOC communities. Their rates are higher. If you think these statistics are high, their rates are higher. In 2018, almost 3 in 10 sexual minority victims reported that they had used drugs or alcohol in the previous 12 months to cope with their lifetime experiences of abuse and violence, almost triple the proportion of heterosexual victims. Trauma is not what happens to you, trauma is what happens inside of you. That's huge, huge. Have to think about that. It's not what happened to me, it's what's going on inside of me as a result of what happened to me. So if you lived in a household where physical violence was not even the norm, but was happening, then you end up living in fear. And that fear never leaves you. And you can't live in fear for a long time. It's exhausting. And so after living in fear for a lot of years, what do we end up doing? We end up looking for a solution. And our solution is always drugs and alcohol because it's readily available and I don't need a prescription. Especially with the lack of mental health resources as we move, forward, the cracks in our social safety nets keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And accessing mental health services is a long time. I just had to have an MRI. I waited 4 months just for an MRI. So if you're feeling like you want to kill yourself today, but you just want to talk to somebody and maybe get some help, how long do you have to wait? So people use drugs and alcohol to escape their reality because reality is cruel to them. My reality is very painful. My reality is full of fear. My reality is full of resentment. My reality is full of self-pity. And I can only stay there for so long before I start looking for solutions. We live in a quick fix society, right? I have a headache, what do? Take an Advil. How long does it take you to take an Advil before you have a headache? Not long, right? How many people have them in their purse? Yeah, right? We're a quick fix society. And so we're trained to fix the problem immediately. Now, luckily, we're coming out of this, but for us, we're not. The COVID reality. According to a study conducted by the Canadian Centre on Substance Use and Addiction, shortly after a pandemic first threw our lives into chaos, 7 out of 10 Canadians were at home more, and those people, 2 out of 10, reported an increase in their drinking for different reasons. People are describing a pattern of drinking more, the lack of routine structure that we had to our day, stress. It all contributes to people coping with strategies that are unhealthy. For people who have a substance use disorder, have an addiction, are trying to get by, COVID was brutal because it isolated us. And isolation for us is a killer. It shut down our 12-step meetings. It shut down services. It shut down access. It shut down a lot of things. The Canadian Mental Health Association, the Canadian Centre on Substance Use and Addiction say, right now, what we are seeing is the tip of the iceberg. They say in the next 5 to 7 years, we're going to see a tsunami of mental health and addiction issues. We're just seeing the tip of it right now. The pandemic amplified all our relationships between mental health and substance use. A lot of people relapsed during the pandemic. They had no other choice. All their accountability, all their fellowship, all their connection was taken away. And they felt the bottom of that illness chart. They felt the pain, the fear. Come on. I like to talk about the economic burden. Why? Because it affects us all. $70,000 is the estimated cost to all of us when someone relapses. So I've been sober for 5 years. I'm making other things very important in my life except for my recovery. I start getting off the path of my recovery, and I have a relapse. By the time I go to detox or go to the hospital or start experiencing health issues because of my relapse, if it's an extended one, all that into consideration, it costs us $70,000. The per person cost in Canada associated with substance use increased from $1,000 per person in 2007 to $1,081 in 2014, and now it's $1,249 for every Canadian. Think about that. How many people live in Canada? 40 million. Each one of us now pays $1,249 for hospitals, mental health services, ambulances, detoxes, anything associated with addiction. It costs every single one of us. Alcohol and tobacco use contributed to the majority, 63% of the costs. Why? Because alcohol is a drug that takes us a long time to get to that progressive stage of it where it kills us. We spend a lot of time in the hospitals. Our liver shuts down, our kidneys shut down, other organs start shutting down, but it's a very long process. Whereas Ryan was so apt to point out to us, overdoses are instant. Take us out really quick. No cost to the healthcare system. So that's why alcohol and tobacco make up the majority of hospital costs and everything attributed with it. Barriers to treatment. So, why doesn't everybody just go to treatment? Right? In the case of substance use disorder and addictions, the barriers include treatment availability, wait lists, cost, admission requirements, the big one, stigma. Even if my employer's employee health plan covers it, am I going to go to my boss and say I need to go to rehab? No. Why? Shame, guilt, let alone pride and ego, right? Step 1 in the 12 steps says we admitted that we were powerless over drugs and alcohol. Why is that the first step? Because that's the hardest one. I go to admit I got a problem. Treatment costs in Canada, there they are. No plug into Jericho Road, though. So, Desmond Tutu has a great saying. He says, instead of pulling people out of the river, we got to figure out why they're falling in. Right? Treatment is a great solution to get people on the right path, but we got to start looking at this from a bigger scale. Why are people choosing drugs and alcohol as a solution to their life? What is going on in our lives that we feel full of fear, anxious, nervous, guilt, shame, all that stuff? We also need to increase the funding. Healthcare is the biggest cost for any provincial government. So out of all the dollars associated to healthcare, how many do you think get put aside for drug and alcohol treatment and mental health treatment? Hey? You're bang on. Bang on. Yeah. Yeah. Now it differs with every province, but it's between 2 and 5%. How many people have seen the movie 28 Days with Sandra Bullock? You got to be my age to see it. Eh? Great movie. I love it. Yeah. Why do they call it 28 days? You remember? That's how long she went to treatment for, right? Yeah. So our models for treatment, the current system that everybody is focused on is 28 days, 30 days. That model is based on what insurance companies will pay. It has nothing to do with efficacy. It has nothing to do with results. It has nothing to do with anything but how long insurance companies will pay. And so private rehabs and private, what I like to call vacation places, they've modeled their treatment around the 28 days because they know that's as much money as they're going to get. So what happens? I go to detox. I get myself straightened out for a couple of days, get my head on right so I can start thinking normal, start detoxing. Depending on the situation, it could be longer than that. If I'm, going through physical withdrawals, depending on what substances I've been using, it can be 5 days, can be 7 days, it may even be a medical detox. I get my head on straight and detox, and I go to rehab, 28-day program. So I go for 28 days, and what do I accomplish in 28 days? I get sober for 28 days, right? Maybe I'll learn a little bit about my disease. Maybe I'll have a little bit of counseling. Now, whether I'm honest with the counselor about what's really going on down inside, can I trust someone in a couple of weeks to talking to them once a week? Probably not. I leave the 28-day program, and where do I go? Back home, right? Yeah, or back to the community where I came from. I have no accountability, no aftercare, no follow-up. I'm probably still hanging around the same people I used to hang around with. Familiarity breeds familiarity. And with no time, I've relapsed. And luckily, hopefully, I don't die, and I go back to detox. And we call this the spin cycle. I have clients, how many times have been to rehab? 7, 9, 5. Why? Because there's no aftercare. There's no follow-up. A very good friend of mine in the 12-step program says if it takes you 5 years to walk into the woods, you're not walking out in 30 days. Right? So this is the standard model. This is not part of the solution. It can't be. Yet this is what we're dealing with. And a lot of these rehab centers charge exorbitant amount of money. It's a money-making machine, right? If your employer paid $30,000 for you to go to 28-day rehab and you relapse 2 days after you've left, what do they say? Well, there's another $30,000. Yep. We'll get to that at the end. Yeah. That's okay. No. I like questions. So, it's a process, right? Abstinence is an event. Abstinence is what we in the room say, putting the plug in the jug. I've stopped using, right? That's an event. Woo! I've stopped using. Recovery is a process. I got to start figuring out why I'm doing what I'm doing. Why? It takes time. There's no predetermined end goal to achieve. No one finally says, I'm done. I'm done. It doesn't work that way. You're always going to be in recovery. And that's okay. That's okay. Why should you care? I love this. In Jesus' time, leprosy was a disease that caused social isolation, shame, and disconnection. Jesus did not shy away from those inflicted with this disease. He embraced them, healed them, and brought them back into community. So significant was this act that it is recorded in all 4 of the Gospels. We are called to embody Christ's love by spending time with those on the margins. Addiction is a disease that causes social isolation, shame, disconnection. In the same way that Christ showed love, healing, and grace to those afflicted with leprosy, we too are called to do the same for those afflicted with addiction, embracing them, offering opportunities for healing and welcoming them into the community without judgment and with grace. Back to what I was saying at the beginning. This is a community problem that requires a community solution. If we're not all in this ball game, those numbers are going to keep going the way they're going. Part of our 12-step process, step 12 says that after having had a spiritual awakening as a result of doing these steps, my job is now to help others. It becomes what I have to do to maintain my sobriety and my recovery. There's a line in the big book I really like, and it says that you have a new employer. God's my new employer. And I have to, as a part of my recovery, continually try to help people figure out the solution. Figure out that I'm not God and there is a God. And He's going to help me to find that solution. It sounds a little bit like discipleship, right? So, Jericho's response. We provide a safe community that addresses the pressing issues of addiction, an opportunity to start the conversation on addiction and recovery, and provide church leaders, church congregations with coaching and strategies to address addiction in their faith communities. We start off with our discipleship house. It's a 9-month addiction treatment program. First stage, putting the plug in the jug and starting to live normal. Structure and discipline. Getting up at a decent time in the morning, doing a chore, going to devos, starting to figure out what's going on. And then we have continuing care, where guys can come and they can start reintegrating back into society, still in community, still with accountability, still with a helping hand if they need it. And that's indefinite. We don't put time limits on it. Everybody's different. Everybody's recovery journey is different. We said that at the beginning. So if I require 6 months to, start getting back, reintegrated back into society and start working part-time or going to school or whatever, so be it. It's 6 months. If I need 2 years, it's 2 years. Right? Everybody's journey is different, and we have to give the time. As we all know, it takes time to heal. All of us heal at different lengths of time. And so I may require a bit more time than you may require. The same with the trauma, right? I'm trying to keep you out of here. According to the National U.S. Institute on Drug Abuse, rehabilitation programs of 90 days or longer are needed to give an addicted person enough time to recover. Long-term programs have a 70% sobriety success rate. Short-term is 16 to 20. So that begs the question, why are there so many 30-day programs out there, right? Well, we know the answer now. Yeah. And if it's a for-profit rehab, right? Yeah. 3 times the bang for the buck. That's right. It doesn't work. I have guys that tell me they've gone to a 30-day program they used the day they got out. Right? Nothing's changed. Nothing's changed. They haven't worked on anything. They haven't been in there long enough to understand what being honest with themselves is about. They haven't been there long enough to understand. Sorry? Yeah. Oh, yeah. And a lot of us are in rehab for the wrong reasons. Right? Rule number 1, you can't make anyone get sober. So for any parents out there, you can't force your kid into rehab. You can, but he's going to wait it out for the 30 days or whatever, or look for a reason to get expelled, right? I sound like a parrot to all the guys when I say this. Structure and discipline. We're very undisciplined and very unstructured when we're using, right? Because majority of our effort and time is spent doing what? Drugs and alcohol, using, finding drugs, looking for drugs, getting money to get drugs, right? Yeah. No tech distractions. The evil cell phone. Peer mentoring, staff with lived experience. All my staff in our 9-month rehabilitation program have lived experience. Why is that important, do you think? Exactly. Yeah. Community connection, giving back and volunteering, service work. Service keeps us sober. Why is service work so important? You may ask yourself. Service keeps us out of our head, right? It's hard to think about myself when I'm doing something for somebody else. I'm going to get t-shirts made and I'm going to sell 1 million of them. I may not be much, but I'm all I think about, right? Yeah. Life skills. You would be surprised how many of our clients don't know how to cook or do laundry. And I'm talking about 37 to 45-year-olds. Yeah. Accountability, inner healing, starting to deal with those adverse childhood experiences. That journey alone, depending on the trauma that you've experienced, can be a 1 to 2 year journey. Right? If you were sexually molested as a child, it may take a long time before you're going to trust anyone to tell them that. And of course, our fellowship, our 12-step fellowship, and the big one, all our clients do the 12 steps in the first 6 months. Now, the 12 steps are cyclical. We keep doing them over and over and over again. They're not linear. So it's not, I've done the 12 steps, I'm out of here, right? When I came into Jericho Road, I wasn't ready to be completely honest in my 12 steps the first time around. There were some things that I wanted to keep to myself. I just wasn't ready to deal with them. But on the second time round, I was. And that's why the steps are circular. Come on. So we go right from our 9-month treatment to our continuing care housing. Seamless transition. We give independence, apartment-style units, practicing recovery skills, more connection to faith-based communities, co-occurring support. The strongest predictors of the higher life quality were engaging in more activities and more time spent with other people in recovery. We need to stay in community. Back to what we were saying at the beginning. This is a community problem which requires a community solution, right? So it just doesn't end and then begin again. No. It's all community. We also have a servant leaders in training program, our SLT program, where graduates can start gaining work experience. The benefit to the employers is that they have access to the Jericho Road staff in support of the guys doing internship work. The benefit to these grads is unbelievable. It gives them work experience. You would be surprised how many 35-year-old people in rehab do not have a resume, do not have or have not had a steady job in over 10 years, or have No job references. Why don't they have any job references? They can't keep a job, right? Yeah. Yeah. I worked in the restaurant industry for 13 years in active addiction, and I had 27 jobs in 13 years. They receive financial compensation, and then they also have support to start learning how to manage their financial compensation, right? Most normal people are brutal with money, right? So if you've never had a budget in your life because all your money went to your addiction, how are you supposed to know financial literacy? You're not, right? So we help them with that as well.